in general, where's the philosophy come from, or what are your standards of governance, and what do you think about this hereditary right to rule?
Yeah, okay, that's a good jumping off point. I feel that there are certainly positives to hereditary monarchy because it is sort of a quite an ancient ideal, um, where you have a society ruled by people who, from their very birth, were trained in to almost like a Platonic philosopher class, king class. They were trained to rule, and they had a sort of a sense of divinely guided stewardship towards their population. The problem with modernity is that we've sort of exploded a lot of these legitimate um, claims to rule on something that is fundamentally on the outside of human political concerns as such, and also temporality is another big problem in that we have systems that are basically crafted to uh, create like momentary in the moment solutions to like problems that are like so incredibly mind-boggling. To quote the famous quote from Trash World Citizen AJD Henry on Twitter, the famous poet of the Black Pill, he said, "We are fucking shit up that is not easy to unfuck." So, and this goes for everything. But I think legitimacy in the modern world is a sort of a tough question because at the end of the day, I do side with thinkers like postmodern thinkers like Michel Foucault, who explain that power has become the very generative and it's almost like the will to power. It's something that has become exploded and decentralized throughout society. It is the language from which politics and everything else is generated from. It's no longer the case that after, before the 18th and 19th century, power was very much the power of the sovereign, the power of life and death over the citizenry, over the subject class. But nowadays, power is something that is biopower. It's meant to preserve whole populations. It is something that is more intangible and more diffused throughout civilization. And so we have this situation where we can't even get a fundamental grasp upon what power is nowadays. And so I feel that the problem with a lot of reactionary thought is that it entirely rejects this sort of postmodern analysis of power, which I think is a huge mistake. And a lot of people on the right are starting to realize that we need to sort of look at and examine what the new left and the postmodernists, what they're saying about power in the modern world, because they're closer to the truth than the Jordan Petersons of the world. I hate to say it, but that's just the reality of it. And I very much agree with Danny that we have to reject a lot of the dichotomy that has sprung about from like American modern liberalism, where it's left versus right, and what is constituted as right wing is like, I don't know, capitalism or like tax cuts, Fox News, and what is left is like the welfare state. I think that politics needs to expand. We need to have and whether we can do this through patchwork or not, that's a question. Um, so I'm kind of hazy with where I stand, but I do believe that in the future, these questions, I think political experimentation is almost inevitable with the end of every great epoch, and we are approaching an end. We are in a Kali Yuga type situation, and what happens now? I don't believe that there's going to be this like epic collapse event. Maybe if like a solar flare comes, then all bets are off. But and the power grid goes down. But I think collapse is something that's much more fundamentally a multi-generational process than like this sort of like LARP power fantasy where it's like the American government collapses and we get to like have Caesar Augustus come about.
Boogaloo,
Yeah, the
boogaloo.
Boogaloo, the Boogaloo. That's something that's just a LARP fantasy. I think we have to come to terms with the brilliant sort of reflexivity of the liberal system being able, like modern power is capable of absorbing criticism and absorbing resistances. And this is what Foucault talks about. Modern power is capable of absorbing resistances to its challenges and resistances to its very structures, and is able to sort of smooth them over and incorporate certain aspects of resistance to its structure. So liberalism is very good at that. It's very
so it's kind of like it's like you see on social media that we're part of the kind of the trad wife meme, right? You're almost making a consumer product, right?
It becomes like a consumable aesthetic. So the trad wife, so women having more children and rejecting being wage slaves and promoting the traditional family structure is a fundamental, in my opinion, as reactionary, is a fundamental challenge to modern power. But when it comes to this like tradcore shit where e-girls LARP as like, they pretend because they baked a pie from scratch that they're like traditionalist. So the problem is that again, capitalist realism, a modern liberal capitalist modernity takes that challenge to its very core beliefs of getting rid of the family, getting rid of collectivism, and neutralizes it by making the tradcore, cottagecore, GF wife, waifu into a consumable aesthetic that has no more vitality or power. So now you get e-girls who have like, I don't know, multiple digit body count that pretend to LARP as trad wives. And it's incredible.
A bit too visceral there, Gio. I'm
going off right now. I'll shut up right now.
Well, I want to hear from Theodore and then from Phil as a response to what Gio was talking about.
I just realized they said body count. Oh my god.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, I'll leave the trad stuff aside for a second because that is another great conversation to have, actually, that kind of spurs off this one. But for now, I like what you said about your framework, because this is why I used to be in favor of somewhat of a monarchy system, because the idea that your leaders should be trained from birth to be a good leader is a fascinating one and very compelling. So I can find the framework there, but the problem that always bothered me is, where's the real world examples of the good monarchs who were from birth learned to be good leaders?
King Louis the Ninth, actually. Saint Louis the Ninth. Saint Louis the Ninth is actually a really good role model. I think if you look into his history, he was raised from birth by, I believe, the bishop and his mom, and he did a lot of things. He really worked in tandem with, he really worked for the efforts of Christendom. He worked really well with the papacy. He was a very austere, holy man. He went to the Crusades, the first crusade I think he went to, and it failed. And then near the end of his life, he went to Crusades where he died in battle. But if you ask me what's a really good example of a really good monarch, look at Saint Louis the Ninth of France.
King Alfred.
And then I'm glad. What'd you say, Gio?
Oh, King Alfred, I think, managing to unify Britain, and the fact that he didn't totally crush the Vikings, he rather gave them a sus trap. I think he was an example of a very prudent, very godly king, although it did lead to modern Britain and modern Anglo.
That might be intrinsic.
For example, I'm not going to hate the Anglos right now, so, but that King Alfred's a good example. So, and Mussolini. Sorry. Oh, I didn't say that. I didn't say Mussolini.
All right, so we also have a Liberty Lockdown joining us. Thank you very much, Liberty Lockdown. Good to see you again.
Absolutely, man. Good to see you. Thank you for having me on. And I'm
what's up,
just
bro?
coming off another stream. Yeah, what's up, Tate? I'm just coming off another stream, so I'm just gonna be quiet for a while and listen and hop in where I feel it.
Well, let's see. How can we digest what exactly is the still biggest wall between the worldview of someone like Gio and the worldview of someone like Theodore? Like, where do you guys really think you primarily disagree, and so far there is not really that much that could be done about it? Where do you think it comes down to?
It definitely comes down to, where do they have the right versus does a democracy or a republic present that right, that same right to rule, or are they both equal? That's to me the discussion that needs to be had.
Gio, what do you think?
Like about the right to, again, like the disagreement comes about like what me and Danny were saying about the rights framework to begin with. I think that dignities and duties are more of a, let's call it a Lindy model of human relations, because I think the problem again is that we're talking about politics that has only really existed since for the past, I would say, 100 or 200 years or so. When you really incorporate all of human history, there tends to be certain political systems that just tend to win out, especially in times of crisis. But in terms of that's always going to be the question, because unfortunately, I admit I don't have all the answers, because unfortunately monarchies tend to degenerate, as all political systems tend to degenerate. It's just the rate and the rate of degeneration, but also the kind of degeneration that we're talking about. Because what we have right now is a very weird mix. And again, this is BAP's point. This isn't mine, but it's we have a very weird mix of kleptocracy, so like rule by people who are total incompetents and bugmen, and we have a mix of mob rule. So, for example, the media and various social movements that are pretty much propped up by the elites, anyways, and a sort of ersatz oligarchy that doesn't have any sort of ancestral ties to the people. But I realize that the problem with what me and Danny, and to an extent, Jesse Lucas and Hero were proposing, would be a total toppling of the global political liberal order.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain aspects of neoliberalism, especially globalization and mass immigration and migration, that would have to be dealt with in order to, even if you're a libertarian, even if you're like an ANCAP, I think that, thinkers like Murray, Rothbard to an extent, but definitely
funded by the Rockefellers.
Yeah,
Austrian school economics is funded by the Rockefellers.
He
bankrolled.
was.
Yes, you need to read Nemesis by Bond.
Yeah. That's a great book, actually. So to an extent, a Hoppe. There's certain libertarians that influence neo-reaction who fully admit that you need a closed system in order to have full liberty. You need at least some sort of homogeneity among peoples to have.
Even the founders thought so.
Yeah, and the founders thought so, and also Oswald Spengler in his book Prussian. So what was it called? Prussian Socialism versus English. He said that like when it comes to the primordial order of what he meant by socialism was really just like right-wing collectivism, where like people in the Germanic tribes, they were very open-landed. They needed to defend themselves because their land was always being attacked, whereas Britain and the Anglos created modern libertarianism, modern liberalism, because they were an island peoples that could resist certain attacks, and they also didn't have that same history of banding together collectively to propel certain invaders that did come along. I mean, Spengler, he's kind of iffy when it comes to history, but like, it's so the point being is that what we have, the conditions we have right now, aren't suited for absolute monarchy and aren't suited for a passive form of authoritarianism. But the hope is that eventually, when things get really desperate, people will inevitably go back to more Lindy, more traditional forms of political order. And that's just a hope. And it's sort of a white pill, but it's the best white pill we have. Because the other option is that the modern system, the modern Leviathan, Moloch, will just find a way to exist forever. And we're all going to live in a global favela, and we're all going to live in a pod and eat the bugs. And I don't know what to say about that.
So it's like Neo Brazil, basically. Fast forward.
No, but here's the thing. This whole Brazil meme that comes from 4chan. Half of my family comes from Brazil, even though we're Italian. My mother's side has lived in Brazil since the original European, specifically Italian immigrants came there after World War I. And the thing is, Brazil, however fucked up they are, and they're very fucked up, they have a sense of national unity and identity that I would say even America doesn't have anymore. For example, the new right in Brazil is much, much stronger than the identitarians in America. So that's another point of contention. But I do think as a model, we are fighting global Brazilification in terms of this very class-based of tiny elite that live in their gated communities and the vast majority of people who live in like Ready Player One sky high trailer park favelas. And or now it's going to be pods. It's going to be the sky coffin cities like in the Holy Mountain, where you get to eat in the factory, you get to work and live in the factory, but you just get to go home and you live in your sky coffin.